Here is today's featured headline in space. Sierra Space no longer plans to send its Dreamchaser vehicle to the International Space Station on a test flight as it pivots to defense. Today is September 26th, 2025, and you're listening to Space News First Up. Here are today's other top headlines. The Artemis 2 mission could launch as soon as early February. L3 Harris said it has successfully demonstrated a satellite-based radio system that allows military aircraft to use commercial satellite broadband services. NASA selected startup Katalyst Space to attempt a mission to reboost an astronomy satellite. And the German government plans to make a major investment in military space systems.
First Up is produced by Space News, the industry standard for professional space journalism. Visit spacenews.com for breaking news, policy updates, and original analysis.
We begin today with news that Sierra Space no longer plans to send its Dreamchaser vehicle to the International Space Station on a test flight as it pivots to defense applications. NASA and Sierra Space said Thursday they modified the commercial resupply services to contract NASA awarded the company in 2016. That pact had included 7 Dreamchaser cargo missions to the ISS. Instead, Dreamchaser will fly a single test flight that does not go to the ISS in late 2026, although NASA will have the option of ordering cargo missions. Sierra Space said it is now focused on potential national security missions for the uncrewed spaceplane. Sierra Space did not disclose any particular technical issues that have delayed Dreamchaser, previously set to fly to the station last year. The Artemis 2 mission could launch as soon as early February. At briefings this week, NASA officials said they continue to plan a launch of the mission, which will send an Orion with 4 astronauts on board around the moon, no later than April, but is working to move up the launch. The earliest Artemis 2 could launch is February 5th. NASA officials said pre-launch preparations of Orion and the Space Launch System rocket were going smoothly. The astronauts who will be on Artemis 2 also say they feel ready to go. The crew announced they have named the Orion spacecraft they will be flying Integrity. L3 Harris said it has successfully demonstrated a satellite-based radio system that allows military aircraft to use commercial satellite broadband services. The system, known as Rapidly Adaptable Standards-Compliant Open Radio, RASR, integrates multiple commercial satellite internet providers and military-owned networks into a single modular terminal. RASR was tested earlier this year on a military aircraft and was able to communicate with the Starlink constellation. L3 Harris is also working with Amazon's Project Kuiper on the system. NASA selected startup Katalyst Space to attempt a mission to reboost an astronomy satellite. NASA awarded a $30 million SBIR Phase 3 contract to Katalyst to carry out a mission to dock with the Swift spacecraft and raise its orbit. Swift's orbit is decaying from atmospheric drag, and the spacecraft may re-enter by the end of next year. Katalyst says the contract will fully fund the mission, scheduled to launch next June. The company received one of 2 study contracts from NASA last month to examine the feasibility of such a reboost mission. Breaking defense reports that the German government plans to make a major investment in military space systems. In a speech Thursday, Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, said the government would spend €35 billion, $41 billion on military space through 2030. The funding would support communications, space situational awareness, and launch, among other capabilities. He cited growing threats to German and other Western space assets from China and Russia as the key reason for the investment.
Discover your next mission in the space industry with the Space News Job Exchange. Visit jobs.spacenews.com to find top aerospace roles and connect with leading employers. And for employers, use discount code JOBEX for 15% off your next purchase.
In other news, Spaceflight now reports that SpaceX launched a set of Starlink satellites from California overnight. A Falcon 9 lifted off from Vandenberg Space Force Base at 12:26 a.m. Eastern. It placed 24 Starlink satellites into orbit a little more than an hour later. The launch was the third by SpaceX in about 41 hours, after a NASA launch Wednesday morning and another Starlink launch early Thursday. The Huntsville, Alabama Times reports that the head of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center is stepping down. In a memo Thursday, Joseph Pelfrey announced he would no longer serve as director of the Alabama Center, but would remain with the agency in some capacity to be determined. Pelfrey had been director of Marshall since early last year. Ray Ann Meyer, deputy director of Marshall, will serve as acting director while NASA conducts an open search for a permanent successor. Pelfrey is the third NASA Center director to step down in recent months, after the leaders of JPL and Goddard.
Share your company's news with the entire space industry through Stellar Dispatch, the press release service from Space News. Learn more and use discount code SD2106 for 15% off when you submit yours at spacenews.com/stellardispatch.
NASA released Thursday the first images from a radar satellite jointly developed with ISRO. The L-band synthetic aperture radar SAR images taken by the NISAR spacecraft last month of Maine and North Dakota show the instrument is working as expected. NISAR was jointly developed with the Indian Space Agency ISRO and included an L-band SAR from NASA and an S-band SAR from ISRO. It is the first spacecraft with dual-band radar imaging systems. Commissioning of the spacecraft, launched at the end of July, continues ahead of the start of science operations in November. SpaceQ reports that fuel problems have delayed a suborbital launch by a Canadian company. NordSpace said Thursday it called off a launch attempt planned for this week from a launch pad in Newfoundland after a minor pad fire during a launch attempt. The fire did not damage the vehicle, but the company said it would not attempt a launch for the coming weeks. NordSpace said it linked the fire to differences in propellant quality between its Ontario test site and the Newfoundland launch site.